Hi everybody, I'm Martha, Vintage Conversation, and welcome back to my channel. Tonight I was given the great opportunity to be on Katie's channel, Vintage and Vinyl, for one of her show and tells. And we looked at the vintage patterns that I collect. So I wanted to maybe go into a little more depth about some of the patterns. Maybe all the questions weren't answered about them, or perhaps you missed Katie's show. And if you did, the link will be in the description below this video, so please go to her channel and watch all of her wonderful show and tells. She has some very interesting guests, and like I said, it was a great privilege to be asked to be on the show. So what do I mean by vintage patterns? I mean vintage sewing patterns. And how did I get started collecting vintage sewing patterns? You know, I thought about that, and I asked myself, you know, to seriously think about that. Now, why? Well, my earliest recollection, of course, is my mother, who would often sew many of our clothes and most of our Barbie clothes, because we couldn't afford to buy store-bought Barbie clothes, and they just weren't that prevalent when I was little. So my mother made most of them. So I saw and still have a lot of vintage Barbie patterns that I used to make Barbie clothes for my little girls. My mother also had numerous patterns for us and for herself, and she sewed quite frequently, and she sewed very well. My mother could actually create a pattern for a dress that she saw. That had been, she had wanted to go to college to become a fashion designer, but she met my father, and you know, who'd just come home from World War II, and the rest is history. So, and I'm part of the history. But I remember looking at her patterns and the pretty clothes and seeing the things she made from them, and I don't know, the clothes are a glimpse into another time, a fashion that I very much admire and would love to wear. It's just, you know, they're not prevalent, and I can't create patterns like my mother could, and it's hard to find patterns. I don't know, it's just a whole deal, okay? It's just a whole deal. I know there's a subculture that still dresses that way, and I wish I had the self-confidence to do so. I do not. But I also liked paper dolls. So looking at the pictures on the patterns is kind of like paper dolls. So anyway, as time went by, and I started sewing things for my kids, some of their clothes and costumes, things like that they needed that, you know, just wasn't on the rack, I started accumulating a few patterns of my own that I purchased full price. And boy, they were dear, let me tell you what. We were of limited income, so buying these patterns was not cheap for me. So unfortunately, I didn't inherit my mother's patterns. I do have the Barbie patterns, and that is a whole other topic that we'll discuss in just a little bit. But as time moved on and I became a reseller, I started, especially at the Goodwill bins, I started finding patterns. Every time I go to the bins, I find patterns. And I get almost every pattern that I find. And the majority of them, I'd say like 95%, are some sort of vintage. A lot of them are just 80s patterns, 90s patterns that really don't have much value financially or at this point in time aesthetically. But I keep them because you never know when you might have to make something or adapt them into something that, for whatever reason. My favorite patterns are the 1960s, early to mid 60s patterns. That's the fashion style that I admire the most. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some patterns, of course. We'll discuss them, a few things about them, and I'll try to put them into a perspective that that you might can jive with a little bit better by pointing out TV shows that this style would have been worn in, or that characters from these TV shows, if they were going to sew something for themselves, these were the types of patterns that they would have used. Now, when we start, and I'm also going to show you a couple of different pattern makers and tell you a few facts about them. The limited facts that I know, because folks, let's be honest here. I am not a collector that can tell you the most minute details about every pattern in every era and pattern maker and designers, and that's not me. How do I choose the patterns that I really like? By how they look. Sorry, I keep hitting my table. That's how I decide. It's how, what do they look like? I'm drawn aesthetically to the patterns. That's how I pick them as favorites. So, you know, you'll see. All right, let's start with just some basic clothing patterns, and let me tell you, what I was talking about before. As I'm in this process that many of you know about, moving into a new studio from my old studio that was a shared space of my sewing, quilting with my eBay and now YouTube work, things had to be packed away. The Barbie clothes have been packed away for many years, the Barbie patterns, because my girls are all grown up, and my granddaughter was never a Barbie. She didn't do Barbies, really. She did softball. That's what she did. So they're packed away in a storage area, storage building that we have. And then I have some other, in fact, I have my oldest pattern, which is like a 1930s pattern, which, by the way, patterns back, let me tell you, if you've looked at patterns, you'll know that inside a pattern envelope you will find the patterns to cut out. They are usually made from tissue paper. Then there will be a folded instruction paper, sometimes more than one, that guides you on cutting placement, you know, types of material that you are best suited to the particular pattern that you've bought, how to lay them out. It's a cutting guide. You know, what does this mean on the pattern? When you see this mark, what does that mean? You know, seam allowances, all that kind of stuff. But some of the older patterns, they didn't have that. They just had a picture of the pattern because they expected the person making the clothing to have already been taught things about, you know, making clothes. So the patterns sometimes were a little vague, and you don't always get dates on your patterns, so you have to look at them. And there are sites that you can go to that will help you to figure them out. You can always use eBay if you want to trust that what they're saying is absolutely true. You can research it yourself. You want to look at things like how the envelopes changed over time. You can research that. For instance, the Simplicity patterns, they changed their envelopes multiple times. They started out with the Simplicity name down the side, written in a script, and then they changed to a block, and then it went to the top, and then it was colored. And McCall's patterns, up to 1951, they were McCall patterns. In 52, there was an S added to it. So that right there gives you a big date. Let's see, I have mostly McCall's patterns, Simplicity patterns. I have some Butterick. I think I have an Advance. I have a mail order one. I have a couple of Vogue patterns, vintage Vogue patterns. Let's see. I have a Style. So there was, if you've ever been to pick out a pattern, there's these big catalogs, and they're divided up into, you know, everyday clothing, workwear, evening clothes, you know, pajamas, costumes, household, things like that. And you go through and there's pretty pictures, and each one of them will tell you that this is in pattern, I don't know, 8016. It's a Vogue 8016. So you go to these big filing cabinet drawers, the ones that say Vogue, they'll say Simplicity and McCall's and Vogue, and find the one that says Vogue and that you can see has the pattern number 8016 in it. And you get in there, and then it's like looking for a file. You find the pattern number you want, and you pull it out, and there's your envelope, you got your pattern. On the back of the pattern, you will have information that tells you a little basic information for layout, tells you the best kinds of materials, it tells you any trims you're going to need, how many buttons you're going to need, will you need a zipper, you're going to need snaps, do you need facing to go along the edge of a seam to keep it smooth, do you need bindings, you know, how much thread you should actually need. All the information about the materials and the sundry goods that you're going to need will be on the back of the package so that you can shop. They want you to buy the fabric too. So let's see, where was I? Sorry, I get sidetracked so easily. Let's see. We were discussing, let's go back. Oh, dating your patterns. A lot of patterns will be dated on the envelopes, either on the envelope flap or along one of the edges. Sometimes you have to look in that instruction page. Usually on the second part of it, page 2, or the last page, if there's more than 2, is where you will find dates. Sometimes there are no dates. They just don't date them. So you have to look at what the style is of the pattern. Maybe look at the price of the pattern. Is it you know, a 35-cent pattern, or is it a $5 pattern? If it was a mail order pattern, then you can look maybe at the postmark on it. And mail order patterns, they were found in a different way, and so I have one of those, and I'll show you about it. So let's just get started, and we'll look at some everyday kind of patterns, and then we'll look at some unique looking patterns that are to me. So we're going to start with the oldest of my just everyday patterns, and this is a Simplicity pattern, and you can pretty much look at the style of these ladies here to know that this is the 1960s. So what you're seeing here are patterns that Laura Petrie from Dick Van Dyke probably wore the first season of Dick Van Dyke, but probably only the first season of Dick Van Dyke, because there were so many complaints about her wearing pants that they almost completely did away with her wearing pants in the following seasons. The only other time you might see her in something like this in other seasons is if she was going to do a little dance number of some sort with Rob or Sally and Buddy, you know, the neighborhood group that they all got together and they'd dance in the living room, that sort of thing. So you can tell these pants probably had zippers on the side or the back. That's just the way they were. And it's the same basic shirt, just a difference in sleeve in each one. So let's see, and then we'll move up to a Simplicity 1965. And you can see this is a little bit dressier, and if you think back on Dick Van Dyke, you often saw Laura meeting Rob for lunch, or she would just come home from shopping. Maybe they went to a game show where she told everybody that Alan Brady was bald, but she would have been wearing an outfit like this. Also, if you watched the Lucy show, Lucy wore an outfit like this almost every day to work for Mr. Oh my gosh, his name has escaped me. Anyway, if you watch the Lucy show, you remember, except this particular pattern is like a double-breasted, and hers would have been a single button generally. And usually in a knit, these look more kind of cottony, but anyway. Once again, what you're seeing here, the differences really are the jacket sleeves. All three have a different length, and ladies would have had what's called a shell, which was usually a sleeveless shirt that went underneath it so that they could unbutton their jacket and you'd see the pretty shirt underneath. They were very versatile, shells were. All right, now we're going to move to 1970s, and this is 1970, and this is a girl's pattern, something you would have seen on preteen and teen girls of 1970. So now we're going to think Brady Bunch. Marsha, okay? These are the types of skirts that you would have seen them wearing. You can see they're all basically the same. This is more of an A-line. This one has the pleat. This is a more of a gathered skirt. This one is less gathered, but you can just tell, you know, look at those socks, the knee socks. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is 1970. This is a McCall's 1975. Look how the styles have changed. Let me look at this. Let's go from 1960s to 1975. Look at that. That is such an amazing shift in design. Here we're thinking Mary Tyler Moore. You know, Mary Tyler Moore's show after Dick Van Dyke. So we're thinking the Mary Tyler Moore show, you know, the beginning of Charlie's Angels. So we had more of a more freedom in our clothing, a little bit more bohemian look, California influence, that sort of thing. Look, the wide leg pants, the big skirts but long, sort of a prairie influence. And then in 1971, we really got that prairie influence with the pinafores and aprons and skirts. It just became all the rage. Everybody was wearing it. Midi skirts, the pinafores, aprons. It's just the long ones, not the ones that you used in the kitchen. These were decorative and designer. Once again, Mary Tyler Moore, the Brady Bunch. You know, these are things that you would have seen there on the Happening designed women. Now, of course, I have more modern than that. So they get a little bit more boring. I have not in storage close to 100 patterns, and in storage it's I can't remember. Like I said before, my very oldest pattern is there, and then my Barbie patterns are there. So one of the things that I really like to collect are apron patterns. The aprons that you use. So we'll look at some of these, and this time we're going to go, yeah, we'll go in the same order. It's no big deal. I'll show you my oldest one, my oldest pattern, and this is an advanced pattern, and it is the late 40s, early 50s. Now, 2 years ago, I actually used this pattern to make aprons like these for my daughters. I made this one for me, and I made these two of these for my daughters for Christmas. So yes, I use my patterns. I do use my patterns, and we'll discuss that a little bit. Patterns, as I said before, are generally made from a tissue paper, which is very, very thin. sometimes the patterns you get will be in good enough shape that you can easily use these patterns. But if you find that your tissue paper is really starting to get brittle, which it does, because you have to pin patterns down, you have to cut them out, and you have to pin them down to the material to cut them out. So if you find that they're getting very brittle or they're tearing real easy, the best thing to do is to get a heavier material packing paper. If it's something you're going to make quite often, I would go ahead and get something cardstocky, poster boardish, that sort of thing. Trace the patterns on there, and then that way you have the patterns and they're better able to use. You won't ruin them, because frankly, I don't think anybody thought these would last this long, and some of them have been used over and over and over again. So this one is one of my favorite apron patterns. Like I said, I have made aprons from this one. And most of these patterns really aren't worth that much. They're worth, there are some patterns, don't get me wrong, there are some patterns that are worth some good money. There are some Vogue patterns that are worth some good money. But there are only certain ones. I don't collect them for the cost because I don't plan on selling any of my patterns. So if you're planning on selling patterns, I suggest you get on eBay or Etsy, whatever selling platform you're going to choose to sell them on, or use as your resource to look for, hard to find patterns or patterns that have a high value. That's what I would do. Now this is an example of a pattern becoming very old. Now I have it in this plastic bag because, do you see these edges? Even the envelope has gotten so brittle that every time you touch this, it just starts falling apart. So if I decide to make one of these aprons, I will be tracing the pattern onto something else to use it very carefully. This pattern is 1953. 1953? Yes, this is 1953. This one was the late 40s to early 50s, and this one is 1953. Look at the difference in the quality of the, well, no, I wouldn't say the quality of the paper, because I can't say, with any authority that one had better paper than the other. But one sure had more sun exposure and a little less care taken with it than the other one did. But I really love the lines in this one. They're the full upper apron, not the pinafore over your head apron. So this is something that you would have seen Lucy wear on I Love Lucy. And then the most modern, well, of my really old aprons is this McCall's, and it is 1966, and it's definitely the Dick Van Dyke Show and the I Love Lucy show. And as you can see, it's not as bright and colorful as the other ones were. I have a Vogue 1955, and it's sort of a dressy evening, a little more simple cocktail hour outfit. It's a very slim fit style, which typical of the mid 50s. You weren't going to run anywhere in this dress. You could barely sit down. Definitely weren't going to cross your legs. So I think this is the style where we decided that it was nice for ladies to sit with their knees together and one foot hooked behind the other, because you couldn't cross your leg in this one. But I like that one. I have a newer Vogue than that, but it's 80s and it's just not pretty. This is a mail order pattern. Mail order patterns started in like the 1940s, and what they would do is they would advertise the patterns in newspapers, and you would send off, fill out the little piece of paper, send them some money, usually cash in the mail, order the pattern, and they would send it to you. Now this particular one is really really modern. It's 1981, and the lady who received it, and see, it's not anything like what's on the envelope. If you look, see, this is a kind of a peasanty looking dress from the early 80s. This lady was kind enough to cut out the pattern that she had chosen from the newspaper and attach it to the envelope so that we would have it. And see here, here's the inner instruction book, and it's got a nice picture of it. Patterns came in various sizes, so you would choose what size pattern you were going to need according to your dress size, and that's the pattern that you would buy. I have one really vintage little girl's dresses, 1957, with the ruffled slips underneath, and you'll notice the little girls had their little gloves on. Even when I was a little girl, I'd say in 67, 66, 67, I remember being very tiny and wearing clothing like this, and at Easter we'd have a little purse and then the tiny little gloves that we would wear to church. This is a different pattern that this is the only one I've ever seen like this. I'm sure it's not that it's, but it's a sew, knit, and stretch. And it was for this little ensemble right there, and this is 1968. It had a different pattern material, and I'll show you in a minute. 1968, so we're still thinking of what? Let me see. The Lucy Show, the very beginning of the Brady Bunch. But look at this, the pattern in it. It's not on tissue paper. It's on a nice paper that, thick like a good quality shipping paper. See that? This is some really good paper. This would be the kind of paper that I would want to get, because you can buy pattern paper for making your own pattern. So this is the kind of paper that I would want to get to trace my pattern if I was going to be using it, and it was kind of a more worn material, more worn tissue paper. Now I only have one men's pattern, and it is 1970. And look at that. Bell bottoms, and looks like a gi, a outfit for karate, practicing your karate or your taekwondo in. Look at the pattern on those pants that guy is wearing. Okay. I can't. Maybe some cool stud that Mary Tyler Moore met or something like that. But man, baby, I don't know. And in my other stuff, I know I have some underclothing, but this is a 1970s robe pattern. I know I have a really mod 1960s caftan pattern packed away that I was going to make something out of, make a caftan out of, but I never got around to it. So anyway, you can see this is for the quilted type robes, which we saw Mary Tyler Moore wear even in Dick Van Dyke, and then on the Mary Tyler Moore show and the Brady Bunch. This type of robe was really around for a long time, from the mid-50s on up through the 70s. You could get this style and type of robe. It was the 1940s is when they had the lovely chenille robes and stuff. Now, something that I love to collect, the wedding dress patterns. I don't come across a bunch of formals, but I come across wedding dress patterns, I guess because they make the dress and that's it. They're done. Who's going to make it again? So this is 1968, and there is something in here for the bride, the bridesmaids. You can get a long wedding gown. You can get the short wedding gown. There's two different styles for the wedding gowns. There's a lace one and a satin one. There's a short bridesmaid's dress, or maybe a mother's dress. There's just so much You could dress your whole wedding party, from mother and mother-in-law, bridesmaids, bride, everything, from this one pattern in 1968. So yeah, if Lucy had gotten married on the Lucy show, you know, she probably would have wore something like this. In fact, she did wear something a little bit like this with a city coat over it, which is a coat that matches the dress, same length as the dress, usually same material, or a little bit different coordinating, just as fancy. She wore that in Yours, Mine, and Ours with Henry Fonda. So, yeah, I like the wedding dresses. And yes, I relate everything to TV shows and movies. That's how I mark a lot of things in time. Now this one is 1982. So whose wedding dress does this remind you of? If you said Princess Diana, ding, 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 you win the prize. Yes, after that dress of hers, which was not supposed to be wrinkled like that. That was not the way it was designed. That's not what the fabric looked like. That's what happens when you sit in that carriage with all that material bunched up. You get that crinkled look. From then on, everybody thinks that's what it was supposed to be, and it's not. It was not designed to be crinkled. But yeah, look at these big sleeves and the ruffle collars. But once again, you have everybody in the wedding party. If you're going to match them in the same styles, you've got them covered right here. 1982. Moving on to 1984, where ruffles and flounces were all the rage. I actually like the blue one. I don't know. I had a dress kind of like that. Actually, my 8th grade banquet dress was kind of like this one, but solid. Oh my gosh. Okay. That's 1984. I have another, this pattern just fell apart. It was just falling apart when I found it in the bins. And like I said, I get most of my patterns at the bins. I buy a few at antique stores that they're reasonably priced. Goodwill, the same way. They have to be priced well because I'm a cheapskate and I don't spend a lot of money on them. I might if I really was in love with them, but I haven't found one yet that I wanted to spend a bunch of money on, because I could buy them off of eBay if that's the case. I like finding them, you know, the hunt. But anyway, you've still got a little bit of the Princess Diana influence, although it has changed. And if you look, we're starting to get closer to those 1990s looks. You know what I mean? With these sleeves. And I can back that up, because here we're starting to get into the era of the Golden Girls, moonlighting, designing women. Look at that one. I don't know, she looks like a flamenco dancer to me. So you might could use one of the costume. There was some big hair involved in this one. I'll tell you what. And then here we go. This is 1992. And this one is just full of wedding gowns, perhaps pageant gowns, bridesmaid dresses, but look at that, those bows on those back sides. Looks like a detachable train. But yeah, see. And some of these these envelopes are torn because, like I said, I get them out of the bins and secondhand, and so they've not always been cared for well. They often have notations on them in writing, and I have a couple of them that have my name on them, and I didn't put it on there, so don't blame me. So there we go. Okay. So what do you do with patterns besides sewing, which is something you can always do? And if you're still with me on this, let me tell you some things that you do with patterns besides sewing the outfits. Now, I have seen and thought was very cute, people often frame their patterns. They have a particular pattern that they love the graphic of, that someone hasn't put their bargain hunting sticker on the front of it. I'll have to do something about that. I see people frame them and hang them in their sewing room, their offices, their bedrooms. They look really good in your little corners in your bedrooms where you do your makeup and you get dressed, and you know, your whole little girl corner, your make myself beautiful corner, whatever. I have seen them take a 4-pane window, an old one, and paint it, distress it, and then put these inside behind the glass so that you have multiples of these in one presentation. You can go to fabric centers such as Joann's and get what's called a transfer that you can run through. Put this on your copy machine and you run the transfer paper through your copy machine, and it will put this picture on the transfer paper, which you can then iron onto bags, you know, like shopping bags, thrifting bags, you know, that sort of thing. They look really cute doing like that. There are so many little cute ideas of where you can cut these apart and make bookmarks and dolls. And in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab some pictures off of Pinterest, which is where you should look if you want to find something to do with a vintage pattern. And I'll show you a few examples of things that you can do with the patterns. One of my ultimate goals with these older patterns is to use that transfer paper, and I want to turn the face of these patterns, including, you know, the name and all that stuff that's on them, into a quilt block. And I want to make a quilt out of all these different pattern fronts. I think it will be very unique and I will enjoy it. And that's something that I will do when this room gets finished, and I'll be sure and show you so that you can see it done. But no, there's just these patterns just really intrigue me. You know, some woman in 1966 bought this pattern to make herself an apron. In fact, you may have bought an apron from one of the resellers here on YouTube that was made from one of these patterns that I've showed you. You never know. You just never know. And you don't know who the pattern belonged to. It's history, man. It's history. It's our history. So, stay tuned for some pictures. They'll give you some inspirations. I hope you start collecting patterns. Find something lovely to do with them. And if not, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did enjoy the video, please take a moment to hit that thumbs up. Give me a like there. If you're not subscribed to my channel, I hope you will subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified when we have new videos, exciting things like this. And yeah, so stay tuned for those ideas, and I hope I've sparked your interest and, you know, fed some of your curiosity, whatever. But once again, I want to thank Katie for the opportunity of being on her show. Make sure you guys go and check out all of Katie's shows. She has fabulous content, very interesting. If you want to learn anything about records, talk to Katie. She knows so much. She has wonderful collections that she can show you. And like I said, interesting guests that come on. Katie helps out a lot of people in the YouTube community. I'm sure most of you are aware of who Katie at Vintage and Vinyl is, and if you're not, like I said, go to Katie's channels and get to know her. She's great. So you guys have a good day and appreciate your watching. Love you all. Bye. Oh, and I forgot. I'm practicing a new tagline. Everybody's got a tagline, right? So here's mine. Since my name's Vintage Conversation, I'm going to give them something to talk about. So, what do you think? Does that work? Let me know quick because it's going on my business card. Okay? Talk to you later. Bye.